Hello, everyone. This is Adele Bernard from Transition Clarity, and we are going to have another authentic conversation with Adele. And my guest today is David Quinn-Watson. But first off, I want to say a little bit about what Transition Clarity is all about. I am here to help you shine your light like nobody else can because everyone else is taken. It's about moving from the material world into the spiritual world, lighting up your gifts so you can shine to the world. I've been doing this a long time, all my life. The first recollection, I was 3. And this is how I came to running this podcast. This is season 2, which I'm very blessed to be doing. It's all about bringing authentic people to share their light to you through this platform. Everything will be in the show notes. So let me introduce David. So David Quinn-Watson had a 40-year career in the financial service industry, mainly in insurance and pensions and superannuations. He believes he chose this perfect moment to retire from his stressful consulting business just before the pandemic lockdowns of 2020. 6 months later, he found himself completely bored and realized that for him at least, retirement is an outdated concept. So he got up from the SETI to continue making a positive impact in the world. As an empowerment facilitator, David now draws on his experience to help individuals overcome the roadblocks holding them back in life and in business. And here we go. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Adele. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. So, I've said a little bit about who you are because you sent your bio to me, so I'm grateful. Thank you. But I want to go back to more of how you became who you are. And I know in previous conversations, a lot of it had to do with how you're brought up, with being brought up in a family where your mom traveled. She did what she needed to do to raise you. And so, how did that affect your life to becoming not only the empowerment facilitator, but helping people financially for 40 years?
Sure. How long have I got?
You got a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, we tape for till
It's
we
taken
stop.
me 70 years to get where I am. I'm not going to take that long,
No,
but I'll keep it to about 7 minutes. Is that
yeah,
okay?
go for it.
All right. Um, my mum and dad met during the Second World War. Uh, my mum was born in New Zealand, and in the war, she she was a nurse and then enrolled in the New Zealand Army Nursing Service and was sent to North Africa when the Allies were campaigning there. And my father's a South African, or was a South African. He was a captain in the South African Army.
Mhm.
And they had I think, quite a short wartime romance. I saw some pictures of them riding to the pyramids in Egypt on camels. But very shortly after that, my mother was sent into Italy with the invading forces, um, and then to Japan after the nuclear bombs. Um, and she went back to New Zealand after those experiences in the war and never really settled. In 1948, she took herself off and turned up on my father's doorstep in Durban in South Africa. And they married at the end of 1948.
Mhm.
And so I was born in South Africa about 5 years later, my sister 2 years after that. But unfortunately, as I think with a lot of wartime romances, and a few other things that happened. The marriage didn't last, and my mother and father divorced when I was 10.
Mm-hmm.
My father had a business as a travel agent and entertained both people in the industry there, the travel agency, because the airline travel was just starting at the time. So I remember people from Sabina and other airlines that I don't think exist anymore coming to our house and playing tennis on a Sunday, and my father hosting. My mother hosted dinners. But when they divorced, she couldn't hold her head up in that society anymore. And she kind of put her tail between her legs and went back to New Zealand, took me and my sister back to New Zealand. So from the age of 10, I grew up in New Zealand. And I lost my South African accent. So that's why I don't have too much of that anymore. My father being in travel, though, my mother arranged for us it's me and my sister, when I was at the end of my school years, I'd finished high school, to go on a school tour that my father had in his travel business. It was 6 weeks around Europe. And at the end of that, if this is Tuesday, it must be Belgium sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of cathedrals. We ended up down in South Africa, and I met my father for the first time in about 8-9 years, and connected with him and his new family. And when I then went back to New Zealand and went to university, and as through my university studies, I was interested in becoming what's called an actuary, which is a risk manager in financial services, insurance and pensions and things like that. And I took myself off to South Africa to see my dad again in my third year of uni. And he introduced me to an actuary who offered me a job on the spot. I didn't have to write a resume or anything like that. And so I ended up back in South Africa at the end of my university, working for this wonderful insurance company, because every 6 months or so I got promoted or moved to a new position. And so there I was in South Africa until I married and started a family. And then suddenly my time horizon shifted because we had two twin boys. And I had to think about, is this the place to raise these children? And like a lot of South Africans decided, no, the future looked too dicey. And this was pre-Mandela's release from prison. And so we came to Australia, and that's where I've been since the mid-80s. I've been in Australia, worked for about another 35 years in financial services, and then retired just before the COVID lockdowns.
Right.
And what those lockdowns meant is that I then spent 6 months basically sitting on my backside watching Netflix.
Yeah.
We couldn't do anything. Traveling was on the cards when I retired, but soon disappeared off the agenda. And that gave me cause to think about the rest of my life. And I've always had the desire to make a difference, to help people. That's what got me into financial services, because I thought I could help people with their money, and I believed I did. But having retired from the actuarial profession, I decided, no, I'm not going to go back into that. And initially I thought, what am I going to do? Then I realized that's the wrong question. The question to ask is, how am I going to show up? What am I going to be? And
that's my talk.
Yeah, my big why, I tell people, is to be an agent of positive change. Excuse me, I just have to wipe.
Yeah.
And I have, with that thought in mind, I decided I would become a coach, a transformational coach, to help make a difference in other people's lives. Now, the only person I can actually make a difference in life is my own.
Yep.
A coach can help people make differences in their lives, And my coaching philosophy is one of compassionate inquiry. So the compassion is about creating a space for the person where they feel totally safe and
Hmm.
comfortable.
Hmm.
And the inquiry is about asking the questions that help them find their way forward. A lot of people come to me with pain points, I would say. They might be stuck either in life or careers. They might be experiencing challenging situations. Financial services, for example, can be a very toxic work environment,
Yes.
or that there can be just changes imposed because people or organizations are always changing,
Yeah.
trying to get the best result for the shareholders or whatever.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things happening, and people need to adjust to that. And sometimes they find that really hard, and that's where the space I create helps them. Uh, and that's brought me to where I am today. So yeah, there's more stories I can tell, but I think I've well gone past the 7 minutes.
Well, no, but I'm just like, why I wanted you to share that is to get the audience to understand that the fortitude of your mom, right? Of like travel wasn't just like go and jump on a plane, right? Like
No,
the fact
no,
that she's going on a boat here and going on a boat there and then coming back and then she's like, "Oh no, I got to go on a boat again and try to have this life that she thought of with your father," and how it's like, even in those times, like divorce wasn't that common.
no, no.
But the both of them said, "Yeah, this isn't working." Like, okay, off to, and then yet sent you um as a young man to go see the world. The fact that it happened to be your dad's company, a
Mm,
bonus,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I just think like that part of your story is fascinating for the fact that hence the empowerment facilitator. She both your parents in different ways empowered you to be who you are today,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, you're so correct. Yeah.
And it's really funny because I remember growing up and it's like, well, of course daddy's going to get them the job, right? And I'm like, and now if you don't get a job on your own for your first career job, you're blacklisted in a corporate environment. And I'm
Mm.
going, well, how when did that flip? Like, of course you went to your dad and their friends to see who they knew. That was the original networking.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
now it's like a kid coming out of university now is like, find it on your own. Don't go to daddy because you'll be
Mm.
blacklisted that you got in ahead of the other person because, well, your connections. Because,
Yeah.
and I'm always saying, hire for the job, who's the best fit, not who the connections are. But you know, we still have those dogmas, if for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
right? So how did you find, like, did you work with individuals or just companies when you're in the financial?
In the financial sector, it was companies. I was a
Okay,
consultant to insurance companies, pension funds.
right.
Uh, Here in Australia, they're called superannuation funds, but essentially they're retirement planning vehicles. We have other employee benefit type funds here as well.
Yeah.
And so it was a collective arrangement where people, individuals or companies would pay money into a collective fund,
Hmm.
and the directors of that fund, the trustees, in some cases, would have obligations to pay the money. And so I was essentially answering two questions.
Hmm.
The first question was, how much should we be charging? Because we
Right.
know that we're offering some surety, we're offering some guarantees, we're offering some promises for the future.
Hmm.
We don't know what the future is going to be, but it was my job to tell them how to manage the money, how much to charge, how much to manage it, and then to come back every so often and answer the other question, which was, um, have we got enough? Have we accumulated enough? And of course, when there were economic shocks such as the stock market crash or the global financial crisis, that often caused a lot of angst
Hmm.
because the value of the assets fell, and that we had to work out or help the company, the insurance company, the pension fund work out what to do. And so that was my main job as a risk manager, to manage financial risk.
Well,
Um,
and it's
yeah.
interesting because I've heard other people who are in the industry of insurance, and someone asked the question, well, why are we always paying ahead of using it? Because they don't have money to pay out for every claim that they're hitting, right? So you pay your car insurance today because, Joe down the street needs to be paid out next week. So they're always in that catch up phase, right? Pay first and
Yes,
hopefully you never have to use it because
that's it.
somebody else has used your money, right? And I think the financial world kind of works the same way, and that's why when the markets drop or they have those um, downturns, everyone freaks out, and the worst thing to do is pull when it turns,
Mm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because then you're adding to the fall instead of just going, okay, this is what they do. You can follow it year to year. Every year they will have a blip, a blip up, a blip down, but pretty
Yeah.
steady, right?
Well, the
So
analogy I used to use, if I may interrupt,
yeah.
was based on my father's travel. When you travel by air, by plane from one place to the other, you take off and the pilot sets the course,
Hmm.
and 90% of the time you're actually off course.
Yeah.
And the autopilot or the pilot is simply making small adjustments
Yeah.
to get the plane to land where you want to be. You're off course because the winds are changing, the turbulence is happening, that sort of thing is, and the pilot has to adjust for different things, maybe other planes in the area or something like that. Um, Managing those financial entities like the insurance company or the pension fund is a bit like that.
Hmm.
Uh, we'd come back every year or even in 3 years or 5 years, depending on the organization, and we'd tell them where they were in
Hmm.
relation to the promises that they'd made, and we'd make a recommendation about what they needed to do. Sometimes the news was good. They could actually reduce the charges that they were asking people to pay. Other times, after the financial crises, for example, the news was more challenging because we had to say, look, you've got to get more money in,
Yeah.
but let's do it slowly because we know that eventually the markets will recover. We have confidence about that, but we need to cover the liabilities that you need to pay out this year. So we need
Yeah.
to be sure about that.
Yeah.
So let's get some more money in, and how do we do that? So it's that analogy of just making small adjustments, and of course we wanted the journey, the financial institution and its stakeholders to be as smooth as possible, and that's where the managing the risk comes in, because there's all sorts of risks, and making the ride as smooth as possible is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I used to say, look, try and avoid the surprises. Nobody likes surprises in life, um, whether it happens in a marriage or with a business or whatever,
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and that's the other thing too. Of like, I remember saying to my insurance person, they said, no matter what car I have, no matter how good my driving record, my insurance goes up. She's like, because there's so many bad drivers. I'm like, oh, so I get penalized for bad drivers. Yeah, awesome. But it's all part of
Well,
the
yeah.
the plan, right? Like,
I- Um, there's an insurance company here in Australia which does go a bit deeper into the individual, and I think
mhm.
that's a great idea. But essentially, insurance is about sharing the risk. So
Oh,
there's always going to
absolutely.
be a base cost, but you can do
Mm.
things with insurance to recognize the abilities or the quality of the policyholder, the risk that that particular policyholder brings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think with technology that we've got today, that's certainly possible.
Yeah.
But my suggestion is shop around.
Oh, we only have one. They say there's other brokers, but really it's all the same insurance. But so but you're saying about like we were talking about different like how many Australians in in one way that you're house sitting a lot. North America, um, the new trend is like going in your caravan or your trailer and camping around. Do you think that's part of the new world that we're all going to become nomads?
Um,
Or is it just a trend that you're seeing? Like,
well, it's becoming very difficult for young people here in Australia to acquire a property to live in.
oh,
We've
same
had,
here.
yeah, we've had very significant increases in property values. Um, we have an election coming up here in Australia, April, May, and that's one of the issues that is getting a lot of publicity on the news is, what they call the housing crisis. Um, so I do think that we're going to see different ways of living.
Mhm.
Um, older people who have the ability to acquire a camper van or a motorhome or a caravan can and travel, that's great. Younger people need to obviously be more stable because of work, except if you're working from a laptop, probably the minority. Um, and I think we're seeing different ways of handling that. For instance, share housing has
Mhm.
become quite a thing here. Um, and they're even building housing that accommodates that. So there's a central living area, cooking area, and self-contained sleeping and bathroom areas as well. So, six or
Interesting.
seven people can be in the one building. So the old style of the nuclear family, if you like, I think is changing. We are seeing significant changes. How it's going to play out, I'm not sure, but I think we're going to see a much more flexible uh, style of living. Here in Australia, the people who travel around in the caravans in their older years are called grey nomads.
Yeah. Well,
And
and it's interesting because it feels it like what I'm seeing is the younger ones are the nomads and the grays are the nomads. It's only the middle
yeah,
people that are keeping the houses because they probably bought when it was affordable and they're like, why am I leaving? But in my channel that I get, it's they've been saying that the nomad life is gonna come because corporations are gonna own housing.
yes,
It's
that's
not
right.
it's not just the apartment towers, they're just gonna own housing,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Because you think about like in Eastern Canada, in Toronto, a starter house is over $1 million. That's a house. But in Vancouver, which is Western Canada, a studio apartment, maybe a one bedroom, is $1 million.
mm,
Well, who can afford that just coming out of university?
absolutely, quite correct. Yeah.
Right? And the studio or the one bedroom might be 600 square feet,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
that's it. Mm.
Yeah, so yeah, let's not go on the doom and gloom. But I think it's interesting how many people are, because I still, when I was in my 20s, I definitely house sat, right? I was like, sure, sure, like whatever. Um, and then I realized I was too much of a homebody to do it. I like my home. I like my things. I like to know where everything is.
I think we all go through stages in life, don't we?
Hmm.
When I was at university, we share housed,
Hmm.
and I did that even in my early years
Hmm.
of working, um, and met some interesting people and had some great experiences. In fact, met my wife through that experience. So, um, And then we move into the settling down years, I would call it, with the
Mm-hmm.
raising the families, and some sort of stability is important there,
Mm-hmm.
just for schooling and that sort of thing. And once that's passed, it's often where I see people in my clients start to think, what's next? They're asking
Yeah.
the question. Particularly women, when the children are starting to grow up, become independent as teenagers or young adults, um, and the raising of the children is no longer an issue,
Yeah.
then it's a time for that woman to think, is this my time? How do I make it my time? Am I able to?
I'm seeing that more and more with everyone I'm
Mm.
working with.
Yeah,
And I also see a lot of men becoming stay-at-home dads,
yeah.
which I think is wonderful. And um, here in Calgary, in North America, we're one of the strongest homeschooling networks.
Mm.
And so, yeah, like I have a good friend that both him and his wife work at home. They homeschool their kids and they love it because when they do decide to travel, it's always off season. So they never pay high prices for anything.
Yeah,
And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Right.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right. And we're seeing that trend here in Australia too. Many families are homeschooling their children, particularly with the increasing prevalence of ADHD and other things, where
Hmm.
kids don't fit into the standard school system, and they can be much better cared for and educated in their own environments.
Well, but it's not like with my friends, it's not like they don't, it's all on the responsibility of the parents. They go to Joey's house to have math class. They come to our house to do science and something, right?
Wow, that's
And
great.
then
Yeah.
and then like it's like a huge like they have a school orientation, like they have soccer practice for
Mm,
all the
mm.
homeschoolers, right? But what I find the difference is instead of the school bus taking you to school, the parents are driving
Yeah.
around. So it's not for everyone, and but if you can do it, it's and the science behind it is a much more rounded um, individual because kids actually don't need to be in with their peers until high school. When they're little, they don't really need their peers as much.
Mm.
They make friends because they're like Mel Robbins was talking about this in her latest book, Let Them, right? Because she's saying when they're in primary school, like they just flock like as a pod around, right? Like, and then junior high, they're starting to get independence, but they still flock in a pod. And what happens after high school or university is all of a sudden everyone starts scattering, right? Building the families, whatever. And they're going, oh, how do we make friends? Because your
Mm.
work friends are at work. They don't usually come home,
Yeah.
right? And then I also see, especially with men in the later years, they've been at work. The wife and the kids have their friends. You've had the work friends that never, crossed over.
Mm.
So you come to retirement and you're going, what am I going to do with myself? Where's all my friends? Do you find that with people you're working with?
I find that in my own personal circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had colleagues through my working career, um, but very few of them actually became friends.
Hmm.
And then with moving around, as I did, I moved around not only internationally but also within Australia. The connections softened or disappeared, and yeah, so luckily, my personality type doesn't need a lot of friends. I can have a few, but
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely is the case. I think that uh, the circle can become quite small, even non-existent.
Well, and that's where a lot of people are saying the loneliness is huge.
Mm.
Like people realized during the lockdown how small their circle was.
Yeah.
And like in my case, going into the lockdown, the friends I went in with didn't come out with,
Yeah.
right? Because you're like, oh, we really know where people are standing on things, right? Yet in other ways, it was like you're having conversations and then you're like, oh, you're my tribe. I don't care that
Mm.
you're in Australia, right? I don't like you're my tribe, right? It's like
Yes.
we've known each other forever, right?
Exactly. And that's happened, with the groups that we've encountered each other in, and why we've
Yeah.
made this connection. And I would count other people, for instance, Ian Kingwell,
Hmm.
as a friend, and we've been able to meet in person, but we talk virtually 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, he's now expanded my friendship circle, I would say. And that's just an example. There are other people that I have met post-COVID on the
Yeah.
networking journey that I've embarked on with my coaching practice. And you do meet those people, and you can make those good connections as you and I have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because Maria that I met through networking, like we had our first chat and I was like, we're soul sisters. And she goes, yeah. Like she'll have a thought and I'll be like, why am I getting this thought? Why am I thinking like I was thinking something for my business about making more pods, right? Rather than one-on-one coaching, make more pods. People feel more comfortable when it's not so one-on-one. And next thing you know, she puts a post and I'm like, get out of my head. Like, right? And like it's really funny. We have some good laughs about it because it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. She's always, that 15, 18 hours ahead of where I am.
But I think there's so much more to this existence that we have here on Earth than we actually can see or comprehend.
Yes.
Uh, Everything is energy. I'm
Yes.
getting possibly a bit woo-woo here, but
That's where I go.
yeah.
Let's go.
Um, just this morning before I came on, I was replying to an email that I got from a female coach, or actually a trainer of female coaches,
Hmm.
and we were talking about why she concentrates on women-only events, and she very kindly explained her experience and where she was coming from, and I was offered the opportunity to talk about my experience, and with my mum being being raised by a single mum,
Hmm.
and then working in the financial services industry, where I saw women essentially do one of two things. They either played small,
Hmm.
took the notes in the meetings, or served the coffee. And
Hmm.
if I asked them, yeah, please give us your views on this particular subject, they often didn't say much at all, even though I knew they had the expertise and the knowledge and so on, skills. And there were a few women who were like the Meryl Streep character in the Devil Wears Prada movie, who were quite aggressive because they were trying to break through the glass ceiling that does
Hmm.
really apply in financial services. It's a very male-dominated area. And so I describe them as having their big boy shirts on, like the football jumpers with the
Yeah.
padding, things like that. Um, and thinking back to my mum, who denied aspects of herself when she was raising me and my sister because she was like the lioness protecting us and raising us,
Hmm.
denied aspects that could have made her, I felt, a lot happier and fulfilled in her life, but she
Hmm.
went away from that. And to those women in financial services, I thought, well, gee, there's definitely things missing here. So um, I'd love to bring women into more authentic roles, and have them express their true womanhood, their femininity, those fantastic qualities that women can bring.
Well,
Um,
And it's fascinating you're saying this because um, I'm being told to switch to the men
Yeah, well, that's great.
because the women who are coming up, they're in their masculine too much, trying to compete
Mm,
instead of all of us rising in our feminine,
yeah.
right? And it's taken me a long time to figure this out. And I know on one of the networkings, you're like, did you say that just because I was a room of men for that networking? And I've been fighting it because I'm like, why would men listen to me? And then I think back even to my corporate days. And I remember this one manager, we happened to meet at a outside event, and he was like the deer in the headlight look. And I'm like, I'm not saying anything. And he's like, well, I go, your life is your life, whatever, right? And then I'd get these like, can you come to my office? Shut the door. Right? And I'm like, you either can step into that you are interested in spirituality, into the woo woo, into all that. Or the opposite side is if you don't involve your family and your kids, you're going to lose everything. And sadly, he lost everything.
Mm,
He lost his family, then he lost the job. And I'm like, just because you wouldn't say, I'm raising my feminine,
mm,
right? And you talked about, going into the Aquarian age, right? We're all babies in this age, no matter what our chronological age is. We have all shifted into the Aquarian age, like it or not.
mm,
So none of us know what we're doing.
mm.
We're all here to help each other. And even the other side is watching because they've never done it either.
Yeah,
Right. And so that brings me back to a post I made about being gentle with yourself.
very
If you're
true.
if you're going to go in with your boxing gloves, you're going to get boxing back. If you're going to come in and say, I don't know, what what support do you need? Where do you want to go? Right?
Mm,
And so I find like with men is, and correct me if you have a different analogy of, they want to be softer, but but they've been told their whole life it's don't become feminine, to stand in your power, right? You can't cry. And I'm like, hogwash.
mm,
The strongest men I know are in touch with their feelings, who say, oh, I just need a minute. And I even learned the other day, this was fascinating, like when you're reading body language, and say you and your partner go out for dinner with like another couple, and the men are sitting across from each other. They will never sit straight across. And I go, what are you talking about? I've seen it all the time. No, they're at least an inch difference, because if they're straight across, their animal instincts puts their back up. This is going to be fight. Women can, men cannot. And it's like,
mhm.
huh. So now when I go to the coffee shop or wherever, I'm like always watching. Are they sitting straight across or no? But it's just a slight difference, and most people won't even see it.
Yeah,
So it's fascinating. And that's why it's interesting, like with your mom, how you saw like you could have had such a bigger life as a young boy being raised by her. And yet she had a huge life before you were born.
she had, yeah, great experiences
Mm-hmm.
and suffering in those experiences, obviously, because of the time.
Yeah.
Um, um, I'll digress a little bit here, but my grandfather had a German last name,
Mm.
Fickert, Fickert. And of course, in the Second World War, um, being in New Zealand,
You don't want a German name.
Uh, he was put into incarcerated on an island in the middle of Wellington Harbour because of his name. They thought, no, this fellow, is a risk to us.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing was that the US Navy had its base in Wellington for its Pacific Fleet. And so ships would be sent there for repairs. And there was one particular ship that they couldn't repair. And they said, well, Jacob Fikett would be able to do that. We'll get him off the island. And he got the boat fixed. And after that, he wasn't incarcerated anymore. So that's a good news story.
Well,
But
yeah, but yeah, that's fascinating.
my mother told me that when she was on the ship going to, I think, Africa or possibly Japan, or I don't know, she was approached by a gentleman and who initially sort of struck up a bit of a connection with her. But after a while, she started to think, well, this fellow is keeping an eye on me because of my last name. He's checking me out, not because he's interested in me, but because of, my last name. So I use those as examples of challenging situations that people have. And I believe that in our life here, we are presented with experiences to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't learn when the first experience comes, we'll get it again. We'll get an experience again, only it'll be a bit more challenging and the bell will start ringing or the sound will be louder or the pain will be a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
That's certainly been my case, and I've had to wake up a few times to it.
But now we're in the Great Awakening,
That's it.
right?
And that's why we see these shifts happening where, men are reaching out to women and women are reaching out to men, and we're making the connections. That doesn't mean that we're all going to become the same.
No.
The yin yang symbol is really the key for me, is that you've got those two distinct parts with an element of each in each part. And I think that's how we're meant to be as men and women.
But it's also the yin yang of the balance,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like the feminine, the masculine has been pushing so hard for so long that the feminine has to rise up and meet it.
Yeah.
And like I remember in corporate having these female bosses, and I'm just like, chill. And they're like, what? And I go, no one's out to get you.
Mm.
You got the job because you are qualified.
Mm.
And they'd be like, what are you talking about? I go, just chill. And that's where I think with the men too is like how many calls I got to say, do you work with this? And I'm like, yeah. I said, why do you ask? Well, lots of people won't. I go, that's too bad. They're not connected to their feminine.
Mm. Yeah. And even people with different gender identities, there's space for them as well. The yin yang is, there's a duality model, but there's space for crossovers and different ways of coming out. So it's all
Well, and
about
yeah,
perspective.
did you ever get a good relationship with your dad? Or it was kind of like, hi, nice to know you.
I would say that we got closer because when I went back to South Africa after finishing university, I lived with him and his family for 6 months
Mm-hmm.
before I moved into the share house I mentioned. And so we had good times together. But he was very much an introvert and didn't talk much. And didn't open up a lot. So there were aspects that I would have loved to have deeper conversations, but I think we did end up with a good relationship.
Yeah.
He, as you identified, it had a big impact on my life. Just in terms of the man he was. I have very fond memories of my early life experiences before I went to New Zealand with him. And I have just memories of seeing him as the gentleman that he was. He was a very kind, caring person uh, for people from all walks of life, um, and became a bit of a model for me. So yeah,
Hmm.
I have a I remember him greatly and fondly.
Oh, and I can see that through you. That,
Yeah,
because they say however you are going to be as an adult, you get by the age of 6.
yeah,
So, so you had that stability, that bond with your parents.
I
And,
did. Yeah, yeah.
you know,
And then I had some other experiences before then. I'll tell you the one though that came to mind now about my father,
mhm.
because um, his mother was an Afrikaner lady,
Mm,
so Dutch extraction, and his father was a British soldier. They'd
okay.
met during the Boer War at the end of the 19th century and married, and because of that um, cultural difference,
Hmm.
they ended up in what is now Lesotho, in the mountains
Okay.
of Basutoland, as it was then, running a trading store. So my father was born there and grew up to the age of 6, playing with the Lesotho children, and then was sent to boarding school in South Africa.
Yeah.
And he told me the story that when he got to boarding school and the matron came around and it was lights out time,
Hmm.
he gave her a hug. And she told him, "Oh, no, we don't do that here. We don't hug."
I know,
And
isn't
that was
that
a real shock for
harsh?
him. Yeah, but so this was the 1920s, and the stiff upper lip and things like that. He said that there were boys at the school, the older boys even had beards or moustaches. So,
Yeah.
huge difference. Um, and so that stuck in his mind, and he was able to tell me that story many years later. It was formative for him. Um,
That's probably where he shut down.
exactly where he shut down. And my own experience was very similar to that. I don't know whether you're interested to hear it or not.
Sure.
Okay. My mother took me and my sister to New Zealand to visit her family, and I was about 4, and my sister 2. We went on a ship, as you said, and we went and stayed with her mother, my grandmother, in the old family farmhouse in the hills behind Wellington. They'd sold off a lot of the farm, but they still had a paddock or a field with
Yep.
some sheep in it. And one day I was out playing in the garden and I left the gate between the field and the vegetable patch that was my grandmother's pride and joy open. And the sheep obviously thought this all their Sundays had come at once and charged into the vegetable patch. And when my grandmother found out what had happened, she, of course, was very upset and angry.
Hmm. Well, that's
And
that's their food for the next year.
yeah, well, that's right. She was by herself, and she'd spent a lot of time working on it and things like that. So I could understand. Um, she put me into jail, which was the toilet. It was not an outhouse, but it was in the house, but it was still a very small dark room,
Yeah.
and berated me through the door. And at 4 years old, I never had that experience before, and that led to me not liking conflict at all in my life, to the extent I became a people pleaser.
Wow.
I always tried to avoid conflict and try to basically keep other people happy.
Yeah.
And it took me many, many years to work out that it's not possible to make other people happy by behaving in a certain way yourself. You can't please everybody all the time.
Well,
And
if
one
you
thing,
are trying to, you're definitely not pleasing yourself.
exactly. So the first person that starts to suffer is yourself, and then um, you can't continue doing it And so those people that you're trying to please eventually realize that you're not going to be able to please them, and they get angry because
Hmm.
they're not getting what they're used to,
Hmm.
and that causes all sorts of problems as well. So um, those early life experiences are so formative for us. And in my case, as I said, it took me many times to realize that I needed to stop people pleasing in order to, move forward in my life and stop repeating the mistakes. So,
Well, and it's interesting because my story is slightly different. That I didn't speak till I was 4,
mm,
right? Because I had all the spirits speaking to me. I didn't know I wasn't verbalizing. And I also had an older sister. If I looked at something, she ran over and picked it up for me. So I I didn't need to speak, and I was just in my little fairyland, right? And so and so it became the joke of oh no, she figured out where her voice was and we can't turn her off.
and somebody told me a story like that of a young boy who didn't speak until he was about the same age. And then he did start to speak, and his parents were quite surprised at, his vocabulary and things like that. And they said, well, if you can talk like this, why haven't you talked before? And he said, up until now, everything has been perfectly satisfactory.
Right. Well, and it's funny because I remember when I was in primary school and um I'm not a sleeper. I never really have been. And so mom and I struck a deal that I didn't have to go to sleep, but my feet couldn't hit the ground. So I'd play, I'd color, I'd listen to music, I'd do whatever. And that would happen night after night. My sister's like, how come she doesn't go to sleep? Whatever. Then I'd come home from school. Good night. Good night. And I'd catch up on all the nights that I stayed up way too late. Skip dinner. I'm done. And I still to this day do this. Like I stay up too late. I don't get enough sleep. And then it's a weekend. I gotta crash until I crash. But yeah, it's just something I learned. But and like so when people say how did you know you could do the gifts you have? And I'm like, I don't know any different.
Mm,
My guides have been with me
amazing.
my whole life,
Mm.
right? It wasn't like as the person you said, well, everything's been fine. I didn't need to tell you it was wrong.
That's it. Yeah, it just is.
It just
That's the
is.
way. Yeah, it's just the way it has been. Yeah. Mm.
So as we're starting to wrap up, out of all the conversations in your life, what would you say is a defining thought or feeling that you want the audience to take away?
I've been posting recently about self-awareness.
Okay.
Um, we get so much stuff coming at us through social media and TV and internet and things like that. Uh, Life can really get in the way of that reflection
Mhm.
that is necessary to become self-aware and
Mhm.
to grow. Um, as I said, I see this experience that we have here on the small blue planet is about learning. Um, and we're presented with opportunities to learn,
Mhm.
but we need to create the space to do that. We can do that with meditation ourselves,
Mhm.
but often it's very useful to have somebody else as a bit of a mirror or a reflective point. And that if there was some takeaway that I would like to leave people with is it's reach out to people that can do that for you. And that's really why I'm here to serve.
Mhm. I concur because um I heard something the other day that kind of shocked me. So, someone born 1900, they're say they live to 80 years old, right? Give them 90 even. We learn more in 24 hours than they learned in their entire lifetime. They probably had more innovation, like, cars came, whatever, right? Airplanes, but they didn't have the flood of information.
Hmm.
And it's,
I'd say to that, and I credit one of my coaches for this, the learning that you talk about there is consuming. There's so
mhm,
much information, and we can spend all our time consuming it.
mhm,
It's what we do with that information that starts to really matter. What are we going to create? How are we going to apply that information that we've got?
yep,
And there's a third stage, which I think is really key as well. We can create, but we also can take that information, that creation, and contribute.
right.
And as you said, we're all here, we're connected. We're here to learn from each other, to support each other. And that's where the contribution comes. And I was working on my own model of existence, and
Hmm.
it's those three parts. There's, um, I've got it here in front of me actually. There's the cultivation. I call it cultivation, which is that self-reflection.
Right.
Um, my coaching is what I do to help others.
Okay. To cultivate. Okay.
Yeah. And my contribution, which is at the moment working to get an NGO in Uganda back to
Right.
financial sustainability, is the third part. So that's my own particular model, and I think it benefits us individually if we start to work out what that means for us, as each one of us,
Hmm.
and what it means for the world. We can think about along those lines. So that's another thing I might leave with your listeners with, is that
And is your Uganda link in the notes?
I haven't given it to you possibly, but I can send
Okay.
it to you if you'd
I'll
like to
make
add it.
sure I'll make sure
Yeah,
I get it for the show notes, and
yeah.
if anyone wants to get involved. And along those lines, I look at the first people, the First Nations, because they're on the same wavelength of be kind to the earth, like walk step softly. We need all nations because they're the medicine wheel has all nations in it, right? Like the Asian, the black, the red people, the white people, and all together we come as one, as a whole. And if we don't start figuring out how to be a throwaway society, the waters will rise.
Mm,
We don't need nuclear bombs. The waters will rise.
mm,
And um and whether you believe in past lives or not, it doesn't matter. I know that's my tradition to bring in this lifetime as a modern shaman. And we have to start listening.
Well,
And
that's the lesson, isn't it? I mean, if we don't learn that lesson now, um, something will happen, and the waters is most likely what's going to be the case. Uh, and as has happened in the past, the scientists know that this has been the case, whether it's ice ages or whatever.
yeah.
Um, there'll be a period of darkness, a period of rest, if you want to call it that, and then beings will have the opportunity to learn again.
Well, and I think we've had our darkness. I think COVID was our darkness.
I'm going to say a little bit different. I think, yeah, it was a symptom. It
Well,
was
yeah,
like
but
a
I mean,
warning sign.
it was a warning to say, wake
Mm,
up, but it also was a huge dividing,
mm,
right? So like, and I've always seen, like, since I've been following um and understanding what my guides have been saying with the convergence of 1987, was there will be three waves of enlightenment. The ones who are starting will start in 1987 and move through, right? And over time they will all come. The ones who choose not to enlighten will disappear. Whether that's die, whether that's, I don't know, they just won't come along for the journey.
Mm,
And it is okay that not everybody comes.
mm. Yeah,
And
I've heard
so
that from my teachers as well,
yeah.
in different contexts, but yeah. Mm,
And so I was just like, so for me, it's like I'm finally happy to meet people like you and other people who are like, oh, finally I can talk about this stuff. Cause like, you know, I'm like, okay, I have a voice, but I don't really have a voice because no one understands what I'm saying. And so this is where I find, like, my guides are saying, go find the men who are like you, who are aware of this stuff, who just don't know how to share it
mm.
because they're told that's not masculine. They're told you don't do the woo woo. It's like, shut up. Right? Like, I don't know if you guys ever got Donahue down in Australia, but one of his things that in the 80s was like, real men don't eat quiche. And he went, I love quiche, so I'm not a
I
real
love
man.
kids.
Yeah. And he goes, I'm not a real man. And I'm proud of that because I'm not, don't you dare take my quiche away.
Yeah, that's along the lines of big boys don't cry, isn't it? So
I know. And
yeah.
it just, then that's where I want to help people realize that you're a stronger person, male or female. Show your emotions, get into your emotions. We are in the time of emotions, in the time of Aquarius and the feminine rising. And the more we can tap into our emotions, the faster we're going to accelerate, right?
And as
Because,
somebody who spent most of his life bottling up his emotions, I'm fully aware of that. So,
yeah,
um, and one of the great ways that we can tap into our emotions, I think, is with play.
yeah,
Men, particularly, you know, goes with the don't cry sort of thing. But you've got to be serious about life and business, and you've got all these responsibilities and things like
mhm,
that. And we and certainly happened in my case, not given the opportunity or don't take the opportunity to play and just have fun.
mhm. Well, and then you talk about, like the guttural cry. I don't know anything about rugby, but when I saw the All Blacks one, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're tribal. Like, I don't know anything about, like, like, I know
Mm.
football, whatever, but I've never seen a team tribal.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's funny because my friend who is from New Zealand, I was like, they're a tribe, they're not a team. And he kind of laughed because he knew exactly what I was saying. I'm like, holy Dinah. I still
Yeah.
didn't understand the game, but whatever.
But- and women are now playing that game as well.
Yeah, but I haven't seen any women do tribe like that. Like when they were getting ready for the beginning of the game in the huddle and they got that belly roar or whatever the heck they did, I was like, it was like shockwaves in my body. It was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was watching it on TV, so I can't imagine being in the stadium.
No, that's right. It's called a haka, Haka.
Hmm.
It comes from the Maori people in New
Hmm.
Zealand. They arrived in New Zealand from somewhere in Polynesia.
Hmm.
Um, it's used in ceremonial events as well as that particular situation you saw it. Also, as a challenge to if you were going into battle, they would sort of do that to scare the enemy.
Hmm.
But also, if somebody visits a Maori pa, which is a village, they're often greeted in that way, in that same way,
Interesting.
with a different chant. So, um, sign of respect as well.
Well, and I think if anything we've learned from this conversation is we have to get back to respect, right? Like, because the younger generations just don't know how to work. They think it's
Yeah.
all being handed to them. And it's like, mm. And as an older generation, we have to say, well, maybe they have a better way. Maybe us putting in the hard work wasn't the right way either. But it sure makes an interesting workforce when you have 4 generations in there.
Respect for me is about acknowledging the other person,
Hmm.
and it's moving away from this individualistic society that we've created for ourselves here in the West. We need to, as you were saying earlier, connect.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And
So,
it's not even connecting with the head, it's connecting with the heart,
oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's
right?
not. Mm,
Like I was on a networking call, or whatever, and I was just like, we got to start sharing our hearts. And then one of the people just started crying. And
mm.
I'm like, uh-oh. Right. So a few people dropped off, which was fine. A few people stayed. And I'm like, let's start helping them breathe.
Mm,
Let's move through the process. Let's help them breathe. Because people are lonely and they don't feel they can reach up for help. And I'm always saying, oh, here I go again. What did I say? Like, let's do the process. Let's get it going. Right.
love it.
You know, and that's my biggest thing. Is like, yes, like you need clients to pay the way and you whatever. But if you need help, you need help. Call.
Mm, absolutely.
So this has been wonderful. I want to
It has
thank
indeed. Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
So as we wrap up the show with David, um, what an interesting conversation again. Authentic, real, but it also shows how we can put ourselves in boxes and how groundbreaking um, and adventurous our parents, grandparents were in the different times, and how we, you know, are scared to try or unafraid to know or afraid to know what's truly out there for all of us. And I just love these conversations. I'll put all this stuff in the show notes to get a hold of David, to get a hold of me. If you feel like we could help you, I'll also put in the show notes his NGO for Uganda if you want to help with that. And once again, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Authentic Conversations with Adele.